Coming up next on the Filthy Rich Cleaners podcast.
A mentor of mine said to me, Mike, there's two things you could do in life that if you did these two things, it would dramatically improve the quality of your life. And he said, they're simple on the surface, but they're just not that easy.
From your first dollar to your first million, welcome to the Filthy Rich Cleaners podcast, presented by ZenMade. Join your host, Stephanie Pipkin, founder of Serene Clean, as she shares proven tips, tricks, and hard-earned lessons. Whether you're just starting out or ready to scale, get ready to discover how to build your own cleaning empire. Let's roll up our sleeves and dive in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Filthy Rich Cleaners podcast. I am your host, Stephanie from Serene Clean, and today's guest is an absolute expert on establishing an incredible company culture, and I'm so excited for you guys to meet Mr. Mike Robbins. I have been devouring your books the past week, Mike. Stephanie Diaz from ZenMade introduced me to your content, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to our audience today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for reaching out and happy to have this conversation.
Absolutely. So Mike, as I told you, our audience is made up of cleaning business owners, so very small business owners who are just oftentimes stepping into establishing a team and going through a lot of turmoil in the process, a lot of development themselves. And your content focuses so much on the importance of company culture from many aspects. And I really love, there's so many avenues I could go into in this conversation, but I'd love to start with, the concept of emotional safety and what does that mean and why is it important in the workplace and on our teams to begin with?
Well, yeah, look, I think I think of psychological safety as like group trust, whereas trust is kind of a one-to-one phenomenon, right? So you and I could trust each other or not. Trust can be built, it can be broken, but psychological safety is more a sense that the group, the team is safe for risk-taking, speaking up, disagreeing, even failing. Not that we want to, but when you create that sense of psychological or emotional safety within a team, people know that they're not going to be shamed or ridiculed or kicked out of the group simply because they made a mistake, or they have a different opinion, or something doesn't go quite the way that we want it to. And look, it's not easy to establish. It's also not easy to maintain. And whether we're talking about, leaders and teams in big Fortune, 100 companies or small business owners, and especially when I work with a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs, and particularly when they're newly starting their companies, building that sense of trust with the individuals and then ultimately the psychological safety with the team is super important, but it can be challenging.
Absolutely. And I can attest to that fully, especially in the beginning for me. Very high turnover is kind of a pillar of this industry, in the cleaning industry. And so that's something that I particularly struggled with in the beginning. I started my business when I was 22 years old. I'm hiring folks, and it was just like this nonstop in the door, out the door. And I remember feeling that cynicism kind of creeping in of, people don't work out or anything like that. And the battle within of like not being vulnerable because and trusting because you're going through the same problems over and over was definitely a challenge for sure. Do you have any suggestions, considering we do have a lot of people coming in and even, we're hoping for the best, but kind of expecting the worst oftentimes because we're so used to this high turnover. Is there, from a mindset perspective, do you have any suggestions for us on how to maintain that, keep going attitude with being vulnerable, especially being safe, that type of stuff?
Look, I do think it's important to acknowledge, if there is high turnover in your industry, which there is, that's an important thing to understand. And there's a way you can go about it where you're negative and cynical about it and like, oh, you can't trust people and people are going to quit and they're going to do it, right? And look, when you have a bad experience with someone or someone does something weird or they don't show up on you or you think, hey, I found someone great, and then they let you down, or, God forbid, even worse things happen. People steal money or lie or what, stuff happens, right, in life.
Yeah.
So you want to be mindful. You want to be aware, eyes wide open, not naive about it. And at the same time, I think there's a way to sort of understand that that's just part of the deal. Again, just imagine you live in an area where there's a lot of traffic, like where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, or there's a lot of rain or something. It's like you could waste a lot of time and energy complaining about it, or just going, okay, that's part of the deal. And in an industry like yours, or a business like you run, and a lot of people listening to us or watching us run, understanding that that's part of it is essential, so that you're not blindsided by it and upset all the time. And at the same time, you also then can challenge yourself, okay, what can I do differently? Or as I hire new people and talk to them and say, look, this is a business where people tend to turn over a lot. We don't want that to be the case with our business and with our team. And so we try to do a really good job hiring people and taking good care of people while they're here so that they want to stay. But it's a two-way street. So like, let's talk about that. What do you need? What can I do? And here's what I expect from you. So I think just having those conversations as proactively as possible right from the beginning, it's not going to mean people aren't going to leave, but it's going to mitigate that happening more often than not. And I think if you have the mindset of understanding, look, that's sort of part of the deal here, but let's see what we can do to make it so it doesn't just, disrupt the business all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And kind of just bringing attention to that. This is how it goes. And, talking about that beginning portion, that was one of my topics I wanted to explore with you is like, okay, oftentimes we're bringing people in and they're training, and your content focuses a lot of, providing feedback. And I really like the one example you gave in, We're All in This Together of, how we all respond to feedback oftentimes is like a 3-step thing of fuck you. And then, what was it? I suck. And then, wait, what was that about? So knowing that we have to provide feedback a lot in that first 2-week period, how do we even begin to establish emotional safety so that they're open to the feedback, and don't get stuck in one or two,
Yeah. Well, and just for people listening or watching, I heard actually it was an actor on a podcast, ironically, talk about how he takes feedback. And his response when a director gives him feedback was that he has those beats go off in his head. The first one is fuck you. The second one is I suck. And the third one is wait, what? And he said, if I can get to the wait, what? If I can get curious about what they're saying, it doesn't mean I'm always going to take the feedback or necessarily like the feedback, but that can help me be a better actor. And as I was listening to that, Stephanie, I was thinking to myself, well, first of all, I don't act, so I don't know what that's like, but I could imagine it's pretty vulnerable to be an actor getting feedback from a director on a set with a whole crew and people there. But I laughed because I thought that's how I take feedback. And the defensive, the FU sort of response that most of us have, that's the defensive, like, hey, what do you say? The I suck one is more of the self-critical. And both of those, while totally normal and understandable, they're just not helpful for us in terms of receiving feedback. They're also not helpful if you're giving me feedback, Stephanie, and I get either defensive with you or I walk away going, oh, Stephanie hates me and I'm terrible, I'll never be good at this. Then I'm not empowered. But that third step, that wait, what is what I like to call growth mindset, is that openness, that curiosity. And as someone giving feedback to another human, you can't mitigate completely against them getting defensive or self-critical, but you can talk about it and say, look, feedback's uncomfortable, feedback's hard to both give and receive. You can even say, look, I'm not always the best at receiving feedback myself. I can sometimes get defensive or self-critical. It's just going to be necessary, especially at the beginning and throughout our relationship, for me to give you some feedback. So even talk to them about it. What's the best way for me to do that? Or is it okay that I do that? Or especially in the first couple of weeks, there's going to be a lot of training and coaching and me sort of telling me or other people on the team, telling you what to do or correcting you, and just sort of setting the table for that. Because I think, again, most of us, whether it's in school or in sports or in other activities, it's not like we've never gotten feedback before, but it's, can we be coachable ourselves? And then can we encourage other people to be coachable, but make sure that we're doing it in a way that is mindful and respectful? And we don't always have to be, quote, nice. But again, I love the saying that clarity is kindness. So not correcting someone when they make a mistake because we don't want to upset them or offend them or hurt their feelings actually is unkind, because then they're going to make the same mistake and keep making the same mistake. And eventually when we tell them after the 15th time and 2 weeks in, then they're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing that the whole time. Why didn't you say anything?
Quick break. If you run a cleaning business, this is for you. The Made Summit 2025 is the go-to virtual event to elevate your systems, grow your team, and finally get out of the day-to-day. 20 plus speakers, real results, and absolutely zero cost to you. Register today at madesummit.com. Remember, it's free. Okay, now back to the video. I also like just the whole concept, and this is something that we do, is we kind of establish, I guess, the vulnerability of saying, like, we always give examples from the leadership team or whoever's training, like, hey, this is the complaints that I've gotten. This is where I've messed up, and really being like, you know, and giving, like, that's one of my favorite, some of my favorite stories to tell, honestly, are like, oh, this is where I broke this in a client's house. I did this, I did this. And that really seems to, like, totally disengage that defensiveness of, like, oh, okay, like, this is okay. We all mess up.
Yeah, you normalize it. I was speaking at an HR conference a few weeks ago in Denver, and Adam Grant was one of the other speakers, and he's a professor at Wharton, and he writes and speaks a lot about performance and feedback and all these things. And one of the things he said that he did, because he's big about feedback, and then he got the other professors. This is like Wharton Business School. These are like really smart people, but what he said was he had himself, he started doing this, and then with his other professors, they would make a video at the beginning of every semester, and they would read some of the worst feedback that they got from their students about how boring they were, or terrible, whatever. And it was like, and then the students, now it became a thing where they really got to like it, because the idea was like, we wanted to sort of take ourselves down a few notches so we could be a little more relatable to the students, but also remind them we actually do want their feedback. We don't necessarily want them to criticize us, and what he was saying, he was using this as an example to the people at the conference. Like, a lot of times in leadership, if you can share some critical feedback you've gotten, or something you're working on, or a mistake that you've made, to your point, not as a manipulation, but just as a level set and kind of a normalization, like, hey, we all make mistakes. Here's where I screwed up in the past, or even more recently. Let's talk about the mistakes and look at them as learning opportunities, as opposed to people hiding and hoping that nobody notices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And just focusing on, leveling the playing field, and not thinking that you're better than your staff or anything like that. And especially in the beginning, we're oftentimes cleaning alongside of our employees. And so I absolutely struggled with, I guess, oversharing, or also seeing them as more of a coworker than their leader. Do you have any tips for that fine line of like, I feel that's one of our strengths in Serene Clean, is like very vulnerable. It's a very open, and like we all share. But then I noticed as time has gone on with, we've actually had to like set some boundaries of like, why are our staff like trauma dumping on us? Like, why are they just like unleashing all of this? Like, and then it became overwhelming to my managers to basically emotionally care like for them in that, like, so how do we balance all of this?
It's tricky, right? I mean, like, look, I mean, especially the business that you're in and the industry, it's humans. It's very personal. You're in people's homes, the nature of it. I mean, it's not a stuffy corporate job, but even in that environment, again, like, you know, I've been doing this for so many years, and even in more sort of traditional workplaces these days, because of how the world has changed, because of the way that we dress and talk and connect, and people are on Zoom, and, you know, it's different than it was. That said, you know, I mean, again, years ago when I first started in my business 25 years ago, I was constantly challenging leaders and managers and people to like, hey, we got to be more human. We got to be more personal. We got to share a little bit more. The pendulum has swung so far that in some situations we find ourselves now, we live in this world of, you know, TikTok and Instagram, and everybody's oversharing everything. And then I'm like, okay, wait, this is work. This isn't therapy. Like, we have to have some, you know, boundary and parameter. And the other thing that I think about, if you're a leader or an owner, or you've built a business where it's not just you by yourself or you with a couple other people, another analogy that I use is like the on the airplane, right? There's conversations that happen in the cockpit, and then there's conversations that happen on the loudspeaker. And like, I want information when I'm sitting on an airplane. I want to know, hey, sorry, we're running late, or we're going to hit some turbulence, or hey, sorry, this happened, or we'll get there soon, or thank you, whatever. I don't need to know everything. I don't want the pilot to come on and go, oh my gosh, I'm having a really bad day, and my wife and I got in a fight, and actually, this is only my second flight ever. I'm feeling kind of nervous. I'm like, no, thank you. I don't need that information. That's freaking me out, right? Like, but I'm hoping if that's true, to some degree, I hope they feel safe enough with each other that they can talk openly that way in the cockpit and then share appropriately with me on the plane what's going on. And I think sometimes when you think of leadership, without it being this weird hierarchical thing, you have to remember, oh, I'm somebody's boss or manager. And so sometimes there might be certain things that I choose not to share, not to be phony, but like maybe I would share that with a peer. Or again, in the case of someone who runs a business, maybe I share that with another business owner or someone or a friend or mentor outside of work, because I want to keep my relationship. Yeah, I want it to be personal and vulnerable and human, but I also want it to be professional. And like sometimes we have to let someone go or give someone some feedback. And they're like, wait a minute, we were just talking about life and our lives and we just went drinking and now you're firing me. And you're like, oh, sorry about that. It's like, so again, it's tricky, but I think we all have to navigate through that as best we can.
Yeah. And I love, your discussions on the whole sweaty palm conversations. And that is absolutely where I messed up so many times, because what I did was exactly what you just described of like, I want to be buddies with my staff. I want this to be like a workplace they've never had before. And it's amazing and very lenient in a lot of ways. And then when I did have to, I guess, bring the hammer down or like discipline or whatever, it was absolutely so jarring to them of like, wait, what? Like you just like, so yeah, like it's just very challenging.
It is. And yeah, I mean, you referenced it, but there's something that I often talk about. Years ago, a mentor of mine said to me, Mike, what stands between you and the kind of relationships you really want to have with people? And I said, what's that? He said, it's usually a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation you're too afraid to have. And I was like, oh, he's like, yeah, if you get good at those 10-minute sweaty palm conversations, you'll have fantastic relationships. You'll build trust. You'll resolve conflicts. You'll give and get feedback. You'll get to know people who are different than you. You'll talk about, uncomfortable topics or the elephant in the room or what he said. But if you avoid those conversations, because, they can be awkward and messy. And sometimes not only they take longer than 10 minutes, but they can get worse before they get better. He's like, then you end up sort of being a victim of who you work with and who you live with. And he said, but if you lean into those and have them sooner rather than later, it'll benefit you in all your relationships. And look, he was right. And those are still hard conversations for me and most humans I know to have. But I do think if we can talk about the things that are hard to talk about or address some of that. And again, in the case that we're talking about, so a lot of people listening to us, watching us probably have small businesses. They want to have those personal relationships. They want to create environments where, hey, I want this to be a great place for people to work. I want people to stay. I want people to feel like they're valued and they're seen and all that. And then sometimes it gets awkward or uncomfortable because, oh, we have this personal relationship and now we have to have that harder sort of professional conversation. And like in your case, I can imagine too, it's like when you start a business as young as you were at the time and you're still young, right? Like it's sometimes I have people older than me and in different stages of life and phases of life. And that gets weird too. By the way, on the flip side, as you get older and then you're dealing with people a lot younger than you, you're like, I remember being that age, but now I do that. Well, when I was your age and you sound like an old, you're like, wait a minute. So again, for a whole bunch of reasons, if someone could have a different background, a different race, a different gender, a different all kinds of things. It can get awkward for a bunch of different reasons. So again, learning how to be comfortable with the discomfort is a really important part of leading and managing people, but also creating healthy environments.
Mm-hmm. And you just kind of touched on the whole topic of the diversity. And oftentimes when we think about diversity, we're thinking like it's only like race. But what you've just described is what I like have experienced when it comes to like generational diversity. That has been the most common form and or socioeconomical of I've really came full bore into foot and mouth a lot of times because it's like what I am saying is being interpreted through a different experience and lens, and they're hearing it completely differently than or vice versa because of my own experiences. And you focus really heavily on that in we're all in this together. And I really appreciated that angle. And from your own background, like sharing some of your life experiences of being in very diverse places, that was really interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm a 51-year-old straight white dude who grew up in California in the Bay Area in Oakland, where I live close to there now still. But like, my experience, interestingly enough, Stephanie, which I read a little bit about in the book, is that like I was this white kid raised by a single mom growing up around a lot of kids, Black and Latino and Asian and from different. So weirdly, I mean, now I understand more historical context of like, oh, I'm, dominant gender, dominant race in America, all of that. But at that time, in those formative years, I wasn't. I was often like the only white kid on the team. And so I say all of that because it did give me an interesting perspective for what it's worth at that young age as I moved along in life. And then not that I know what it's like to be female or gay or a person of color or anything, but like I do know a little bit from a lived experience of what it's like when you're not in the majority or you're not. And now as being someone who understands that sort of out in the world, I don't pretend to understand other people's experience, but I do think it's important for all of us to be aware of our own experience and have some awareness, if we can, of our own blind spots and our own biases. Like sometimes when I talk to younger people, it's funny, I just got a text earlier today from a woman that I know. She's a client, but it turns out we grew up in the same town. She's about 15 years younger than me, but she just had her first baby. And then she just went back to work. And so I was just checking, we've become friends, checking, how's it going? And she's like, oh, it's a trip being back at work. But she said, I have so much more understanding and empathy for working moms now that I never could have had before this because I didn't have kids. Like, she's like, I could think about it intellectually, but now I'm like, oh my gosh. And she's someone who's been pretty successful in her career. She's been managing people older than her, people who have kids. And she's like, oops, I know something now that I didn't know. And again, how could you know until you know? But that's an example of just like, as we get older, it's not that we necessarily, there's certain things that we can't relate to, but there's other things that we have certain perspective and wisdom that we didn't have when we were younger, and we can't account for that. But then as we look at the workforce these days, it's like baby boomers are different than Gen Xers are different than millennials are different than people in Generation Z. And like, how do we all figure out how to understand one another and leverage each other's strengths instead of just thinking we're all a bunch of aliens who can't relate to one another?
Well, and I really liked how you explained how the whole "if you really knew me" exercise can help establish that we do have a ton of similarities under the surface when we dig down to it, of like, yes, you and I are talking right now about like diversity and wildly different life experiences. But once we start sharing with vulnerability, or even I think you gave an example of like sharing where we've felt othered, because we all have had that experience, and that can actually really like level the playing field of like, oh, I've been through that too, even though you and I grew up completely differently.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think that the feeling of not belonging is a human experience, and the desire to belong, if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy, we all have the desire to belong, and we've all had an experience in life where we felt like we didn't belong. And maybe it was related to our race or our gender or our age or our fill in the blank, but it could just be, look, I mean, it's like they're the cool kids in school and I wasn't part of that group or whatever. And that happens. I mean, I find myself in so many different situations, and I'll sometimes laugh because I'm like, oh, now I'm feeling like the odd person out here. I don't know why, but all of a sudden, I don't know. It could be about a bunch of things. So again, I think that the exercise that you referenced, the "if you really knew me" exercise that I love to do with groups, is basically this idea that, if you think of the overused metaphor of the iceberg, it's like, can we lower the waterline on the iceberg a bit and be a bit more vulnerable? And what I'll often do with groups, and sometimes it's a very small group, sometimes if it's a bigger group, I put people into small groups. We could even sometimes do this virtually, although it's usually better if we do it in person. But in general, it's like I usually start and talk about how vulnerability is scary and it's risky and it's uncomfortable, but it's also liberating and really important for us to build trust and connection. And then what we do is, and I always go first, is I say, look, we're going to do an exercise. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say, but I'm going to invite you. I'm going to encourage you. In fact, I'm going to challenge you to lower the waterline on your iceberg. And I'll go first as a way to model it. And then we'll go around and everybody in the group will have a chance to talk, and you'll, a minute or two each, but just repeat the phrase, "if you really knew me, you'd know this about me." And again, you can say whatever you want. And it's more about if we really knew you in the moment, like, what are you thinking? How are you feeling? And what tends to happen, to make it as safe as possible, I usually say, look, let's not talk when anyone else is talking. So one person at a time will go around. At the end, we can kind of debrief. And the second thing is like, let's keep what everybody says in this conversation, like, confidential to ourselves. So we're not going and sharing it, because that's a big part of it. If I share something in confidence with you and you share it with someone else, it's not like, oh my God, my life is ruined. But now it becomes, instead of it being a connecting, trust building thing, it now becomes a trust violating thing where it's like, oh, I told Stephanie this thing and then she told someone else. Or if you tell me, sometimes the person doesn't even find out. But if I go tell someone something that you shared in confidence with me to someone else on the team or in our community, it might not even get back to you, but that person is now going to know, hey, Mike's not safe because he might share it. So back to the exercise, then everybody kind of goes around. And usually what happens, Stephanie, in that conversation is, even and especially if the group is really diverse, but even if everyone kind of looks the same and is around the same age, what we find out is like, oh my gosh, people have a lot of stuff going on down below the waterline. And there's so much common ground for us as humans, even if on the surface we're very different. It's like, oh, you feel joy and pain and excitement and sadness and fear and gratitude. Like, oh yeah, me too. Like, we're not as dissimilar as we might think we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things that I think is very specifically a challenge to our industry, although it's probably becoming more so because so many workplaces are completely virtual. Though obviously, like in most cleaning businesses, we have the owner, perhaps a small level of management or a lead cleaner, a lead in the field. And then we have a bunch of cleaning technicians. That's what I call them in my business. And so what happens is it's a highly independent type of job. So we are all, cleaning techs are all out in the field. Very rarely are they interacting outside of perhaps a little bit in passing with their management. A lot of this is over text, over phone, because you're out at job sites basically.
Right.
And so one of the things I was curious about, I really wanted to ask you is like establishing this vulnerability and this kind of rapport with your teammates when it is so independent. And perhaps, one of the things that we've done for years now is having a weekly team meeting. And I'm such a big proponent of that because it allows us to have that connection time. And as I shared, I'm not even where my business is at all. So
right.
Keeping that connection and that closeness. And I'd love to get some feedback on kind of our meeting agenda if you'd be willing to provide it.
Yeah, happy to. And you said, I think before we hit record, your team is about 30 people. I'm imagining people listening to us and watching us have different sized teams and
much smaller usually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And maybe it's all residential. Maybe there might be some folks who do some cleaning in commercial or, businesses. But I mean, look, I think each person who's watching us, listening to us has to customize it for their own situation. How big is your team? How much interaction do you have in person versus not? I do think that if we're managing people virtually or if there's people on multiple locations, job sites, we're not there together, we have to be that much more intentional, right? Like, how often are we connecting? What's the cadence? What's the platform that we're using? And ultimately, meeting with people, again, even if it's just you have one or two people on your team or you have a much larger team, it's about both sharing some information. What do you need people to know? But it's also about hearing from the team what's going on. And it's about connecting, having everyone be able to connect with each other. So I often find that most meeting agendas have too much stuff on it that we're trying to get communicated and accomplished. And we miss the opportunity to really just connect, to share, to listen, to learn. You know what I mean? And I think, again, it's often like, oh, I got to get all, I have to tell them all these things, or we only have a limited amount of time and we got to cram it all in. And then we forget, and it's hard if it's 30 people in your case. In some cases, it might be much larger. In some cases, it might be much smaller. It's it's hard to effectively connect with a group of that many people, especially if it's done virtually. Not that we can't do it, but you have to start to get creative with how you go about it.
Yeah. And I love that you said creating that space for the sharing and connecting and creating a sense of belonging when it is also independent. It's well, belonging to what? It's especially when you're new, it's there is nothing here. It almost can feel like. And so for us, we do go through some key metrics. We share any positive feedback. We go over, globally, any complaints that we had, not calling anybody out and kind of problem solving, how we do it. And then, the end of the meeting is literally, we have a question of the week and then we share something we're grateful for and positive, and everybody has time to do it and just talking about that. So it's actually, honestly, it's to me, one of the biggest things that I've done for my culture because of how it is and from a structural perspective. So it's been very helpful. One thing that I thought about though, listening to the book was definitely think we lean a lot more into sharing like positive feedback, like getting reviews, getting emails from clients, those types of things, and less so on just appreciation in general. And I like that you said it's like on their work versus like just appreciating them as a person. So can you give us some like practical advice on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think you alluded to it, but I think it's just to distill it down for people listening and watching. It's like the distinction between recognition and appreciation, both important, but recognition is about performance. It's about outcome. It's about what we do. Appreciation is more about value. It's about who we are. It's about caring about people. And again, both are important. So if you're listening or watching and you have a team and you really want to make sure that you're giving them that positive feedback, you want to recognize them when they deserve it, individually, collectively, but appreciate people all the time. So valuing people and caring about people. So some things to think about are just like, sometimes appreciating someone is listening to them. Sometimes it's just acknowledging that something's been hard. It's looking at the human, it's looking at the effort. It's not looking at the outcome. Now, this is not to say we want to turn into like, if we separate it out, we can have a really high standard for what we expect in terms of performance. And we only acknowledge and recognize when people meet or exceed that. But then we also have a high level of caring and nurturing. So we're caring about people a lot and we're challenging them. And so again, like just checking in with people, just letting people know what you value about them, why you're glad they're on the team, not in reaction to something that they've done or something that they said or some accomplishment, but just proactively letting them know that. I mean, another way to think about it, you talk about turnover. When someone leaves who we really want to stay, like, oh, I got another job, or oh, I'm moving, or you're like, the things that you will want to say to them on the way out the door, you want to recognize them for their performance, but it's really about the human. I'm going to miss you, and this is what you've really brought to me in my life and to the business and to our customers or whatever. That stuff, if you can think about that, like I often say to managers of people, like imagine everyone on your team, it was their last day. What would you want to say to them? And without being melodramatic, it's like, can I sprinkle some of those things in and just let them know? Because at some point, it is going to be their last day, right? You know, and then recognition is like being it can be informal, like, hey, good job, way to go. It can be more formal. But again, that's something that has to be earned. And I think we've lost sight of this in our society. And I often say, you know, if everybody gets a trophy, the trophy doesn't mean anything, right? And again, this is also a generational thing. Like if you're, you know, people who are younger than I am, were raised in a different mindset around some of that stuff with good intention. Because like I'm of the age, and people older than me especially, there was a lot of shame and like, you're a loser, you're a loser, you're a loser. Here's a trophy for the person who's good. Everyone else sucks. And it was like, well, that's super hard when you're 7 years old, right? But then we swung the pendulum the other way. It's like everybody gets a trophy. We're not going to keep score. We want everyone to feel good. Good intention, just problematic because that's not actually the way the world works. Mm-hmm. Right?
No,
you don't get participation trophies in life, right? You got to actually do something to earn whatever it is. And like, you know, running a business, it's like, hey, if you're not providing service that's valuable to people, they'll stop paying you or they'll go hire someone else. And it's like, they might like you and think you're a wonderful person, but hey, my house isn't getting cleaned or my business isn't getting cleaned or it's not on time or it didn't happen when we needed it to or something weird. And it's like, okay, they're not going to reward us with continued business or referrals to other people. Mm-hmm. Even if you're a wonderful person and they really like you.
and that's what it is. And I oftentimes think of it like, you know, when it comes to like having those high expectations and I noted you had put somebody's quote in that was basically like the balance of caring about them or something about like listening with or behaving with your head versus your heart, and that it's like a balance. And it is so hard to not swing too far. And I think you said most people tend to be one or the other. And for me, I tend to be more of the caring. But then when I do need to, you know, provide negative feedback or say we get a complaint or something, it's so challenging for me of like, how do I, you know, like lovingly give you this type of thing? And I think it's just saying things along the lines of like, I know that you can perform so well. I've seen it in the past. And that's kind of where this is coming from.
Yeah. Well, you know, something I heard, speaking of, I talked about Adam Grant earlier. I heard him say something a while back too, that like a way to frame sort of kind of hard feedback or like, I'm giving you this feedback because I expect a lot of you and I know you can handle it and I know you can, operate at a really high level. Like that's sort of setting the bar with someone. And for those of us that maybe have a hard time when we give that feedback, again, if you're someone that errs on the side of like, oh, the caring and nurturing is easy, the having high expectations or giving the feedback is a little more challenging. What that will usually set up an environment is that people feel great and it's all warm and fuzzy, but they're not going to necessarily perform at the highest level and they're not going to hold themselves accountable probably in the way that we would like them to, or we're not holding them accountable. And not usually because people are lazy and they don't care. It's just the environment that we've set up. If we tend to be the other way, some people I talk to are like, oh, I'm really good at high bar, push, charge, feedback, gotta go. But when it comes to caring and nurturing, like that's like, I don't do that as well, or I don't think of it, or that's not how I was raised, or whatever. That will create an environment where people will often perform well, especially at first, and they'll be on edge or they'll be accountable and like show, but they're going to get stressed out and burned out over time. And like people will often leave because it's like, ooh, that was too intense, so we want to do both. And it's not that we have to lower our expectations if we have high expectations or lower the way we care and nurture people. No, just see if we can raise the other one up so that we balance it out.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And thinking about the caring and nurturing side, you focus heavily on authenticity and bringing your whole self to work. But then when it comes to like, I have gotten people in who have came from very like bad workplaces and they've gotten burned before, and it really puts their guard up, I find. And they oftentimes think that we are being fake, meaning that very positive energy and things like that are like, it's like they're waiting for the other shoe, they're scared to love again, basically. And so do you have any suggestions on, is it just patience and consistency? And I guess, can you talk also about the whole authenticity formula as well? Because we haven't really touched on that yet.
Well, look, a couple things. I think first and foremost, we have to check ourselves, like, whether it's positivity, whether it's appreciation, am I being real? Is this real? Because there is a phenomenon, and look, the first book I wrote years and years ago is called Focus on the Good Stuff. Like, I believe in the power of appreciation, in the power of positivity, but it's got to be real. Because if it is BS, if we're just doing it to be nice or to sound good or whatever, that actually ends up having the opposite effect. It's like, we call it toxic positivity, right? Which is weird because you think, how something like positivity be toxic? If it's inauthentic, it can be. Now, sometimes we're genuinely being positive, we're genuinely and people are cynical about it, to your point. It's like, oh, I got burned in the past, or that's not what I'm used to, or, So sometimes, again, it's the sort of, I don't know, maybe it's more of something for people in my generation, but like I call it the Ted Lasso phenomenon. It's like, if you watch Ted Lasso, and even if you didn't, it's like he's such a positive character in this show, people almost think it's not real. They don't take him seriously. They blow him off. And as the show goes on, you realize, no, this dude is genuinely positive, genuinely looks for the best in people. And so like sometimes if you are a positive person and want to create a positive environment, you are going to deal with some blowback and some pushback and some negativity and cynicism from people who don't think that it's real. That said, when I talk about authenticity and the authenticity equation, right, I talk about authenticity being like the foundation of authenticity is honesty, but we have to remove something from our honesty and we have to add something to it in order for it to really be authenticity. The thing we have to remove is our self-righteousness. And the thing we have to add, which we've already talked a bit about, is vulnerability. So it's honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability. And self-righteousness is really that sense of like, I'm right, you're wrong. And again, it usually doesn't show up in a super negative, critical, like we're not pointing fingers and screaming at people and banging on tables. It actually ironically shows up more passive aggressively with us acting nice or acting accommodating when we really have lots of very strong opinions that we just like, oh, okay, great, no problem. Or, oh, you want some time off? Okay, that's not a problem. When really we're like, how could you not come to work, or what's going on? And that's what gets us into trouble, is again, trying to be so nice, but not actually telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I definitely have fallen into that trap before of just like, it's okay. But the resentment for me is like building. And then I can see where that would come across as like, clearly she's not okay, but she's saying things, you know?
Right. And again, it's hard. I mean, someone shows up late or they needed to, oh, my kid got sick or this happened. You want to be accommodating. You don't want to be, but then you're like, okay, look, I don't know what to do. I had a conversation. Actually, I was at a different conference last week in Phoenix, and this guy came up to me after, and he goes, "Man, I try to be super accommodating and super compassionate, super understanding." And he's like, "And there's a woman on our team who literally there's like a problem all the time. One of her kids or this is happening." And he goes, "And I know she's a single mom, and he goes, and I feel like such a jerk, but I don't know what to do because at some point her performance is suffering." And sometimes she's great. And he's like, and it's super tricky. And I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells. What do I do? And the first thing I said to him, I don't know, man, that's hard. Like that's a hard situation. And there's no like hard and fast thing. And I was like, the truth is it's probably a series of sweaty palm conversations and separate from the circumstance. This goes back to something you and I were talking about earlier. Once we know a lot of things about people's lives and it's like, we know they've got kids here and they've got an ex there and they've got parents who are like, and now it's like, I want to be an empathetic person. And at the end of the day, yes, we can be empathetic humans and we're also running businesses. And especially, you know this, Stephanie, as a business owner, like, unless you're like, you know, bleeding, like you're going to show up and be there. It's your business. There's no like, I don't feel like it. It's like, again, it's like when the baby, you know, my wife, Michelle, and I have two daughters who are now 19 and 16. But like when the baby cried in the middle of the night, when we had little ones, it did not matter that we were exhausted and didn't feel like getting up to whatever, or the baby needed something. It's like, that's how our businesses are. And our employees, even the best employees, they're not going to have that same level of ownership. But we've got to set up an environment as such where they understand that there's accountability and there's expectations. And yes, we're accommodating and understanding and things happen. And sometimes your car breaks down or you get a flat tire or one of your kids is sick. And of course, there's going to be exceptions. But there also has to be a standard by which we operate. And we got to be able to talk about that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that example up because overarchingly, this is a women-led industry, meaning both the owner, like I would say a disproportionate amount of this industry is owned and ran by women. And also the cleaning techs are majority women. And so when I look at my staff, I have over 95% of my staff are women. And additionally, almost all of them are mothers. And so exactly what you're describing is like the plight of all of the owners listening right now is we are hiring mothers and we want to I'm not a mother, but you know, a lot of owners are. And so they're like, I want to give an opportunity to people who cannot work a traditional job sometimes and need that flexibility and need that empathy because it is so hard to be as reliable, especially if you're the primary parent. And it honestly, like for us, if somebody calls in a couple times a month, like that is basically zero to us. Like that, like we've just established like that is normal, especially if they're moms, twice a month if they're full time, like literally. And we've just kind of been okay with that. And otherwise, I think it would make me pull my hair out and chase my tail.
Right. Well, look, and that goes back to you knowing your team and knowing the industry and knowing what's normal and what you're you know, back to when we were talking about even with turnover, it's like, okay, there are going to be people are going to come in and out. That's part of it. It's a high turnover business. What can we do to mitigate? Oh, there's going to be a lot of things that come up just given the nature of the people we hire. And we're going to be okay with that. But also, again, someone doing it once or twice a month is one thing versus someone doing it 10 or 15 times a month. And then there's at some point you go, hold on, we're super accommodating and that doesn't work. So again, and everybody who's listening or watching can relate to, you've got to map that onto your own personality, expectation, team, situation. If it's just you and one other person or two other people, someone saying I can't be there is a much bigger deal than if we don't have someone to cover. Do you know what I mean? Like, so again, like I say, mistakes are mistakes. We want to create an environment where people can make mistakes without shame or judgment. But let's be clear, some mistakes are bigger than others. Right? If I make a mistake or something happens, oops, sorry, if I make a mistake in someone's home and we break something very expensive, that's a different mistake than if we just broke the broom and we got to replace that. You know what I mean? Like, and I think most adults understand the difference between like a really big costly mistake and one that's less significant. You know, and we can be compassionate at the same time, also hold healthy, high standards.
Yeah, it really is a balance. And I love, talking about like making mistakes and bringing it back to sharing our own mistakes. But I've definitely found paradoxically is like, once we're very clear that we understand that this happens, it's like, it seems to raise the bar because everybody feels less pressure. Like, so I'm very proud right now. We're hitting 1,400 appointments with 0 complaints. And so like, that's crazy. I'm super proud of that. So over 2 months of appointments without that. And something when it comes to complaints that I've found, kind of bringing it back to like who we're talking to, I find that our customers will always blame the cleaners first if something goes like that's very much like, I don't want to stereotype, but that's literally the experience of like, if something goes awry at the house, blame the cleaners. Right. And so oftentimes, techs providing that negative feedback, or say, I guess our process is we get a complaint and, we're trying to gather the details as opposed to making assumptions, because at the end of the day, we are trying to please our clients, right? Like, but also balancing the needs of the clients with like respect and trust of the cleaners when we don't know what the actual case is. Cause we got 2 stories here. Like, do you have any suggestions for balancing this very delicate situation?
Well, I mean, as you're saying it, I'm just thinking, our teenage daughters over the years, when they'd lose something, even when they were younger, they would blame it on the cleaners. And my wife and Michelle and I would be like, okay, hold on. It is possible that something got moved around, but let's not start there. And 99 times out of 100, it was the girls losing something or breaking something or whatever. So that said, I mean, just with that, I do think that, again, you and everybody listening to us knows better than me in terms of the lived experience of this, like how you handle that. Look, in general, when you get a complaint of any kind, even if on the surface, this is probably ridiculous and there's no way, it's helpful to not be defensive right from the jump, to just listen with some empathy, with some compassion. Oh, I'm so sorry that happened, right? And then figure out what can be done, if anything, to try to figure out what did happen. And look, nobody likes being accused of or blamed for something that they didn't do in life in general. But especially in your industry, that would make sense that would happen on a pretty consistent basis when those complaints come up. And then just trying to respond as clearly and quickly and compassionately as you can, try to get to the bottom of what's going on. And, I would imagine many of those things get resolved on their own. And then sometimes they get pretty gnarly if something has gone a little sideways, or you have a customer who's just not happy in general, and you might end up getting some blowback from them, even if it wasn't anything that was done by any of the cleaners, but like there's weird stuff going on in their situation, then they're just going to offload it onto you. Yeah. I will
anecdotally say one of my favorite ones is our cleaners accidentally like turned all the breakers off in a house one time, and then the client thought that meant they were scoping out the house to steal the jet skis. They were convinced we were trying to steal their jet skis. And it's like, we don't want your jet skis, Jeff. Like, we promise.
Right. So, but look, I mean, the thing is, this, I mean, people get weird, right? That's the other thing to remember, is that people get weird, and that's not an excuse for people to treat other people poorly. But I do think, look, there was another thing, and I don't know if I wrote it and we're all in this together or not, but it's a saying that I've used a lot. A mentor of mine said to me, Mike, there's 2 things you could do in life that if you did these 2 things, it would dramatically improve the quality of your life. And he said, they're simple on the surface, but they're just not that easy. He said, the first thing is be easy to impress. And the second thing is be hard to offend. He said, most of us have it the other way around. Like, it's really hard to impress us and we get offended like that. He said, but if you could be the kind of person that wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be genuinely impressed with and in awe of life, of humans, of beauty, of technology, of just like, wow, well, like a child is like, whoa. He's like, then you're going to be amazed all the time, because there are amazing people and things happening all over. I mean, think about this, just Stephanie, even you and I talking to each other right now, recording this, it's like mind blowing. I mean, again, I'm old enough to remember, like my dad's been gone for a long time. My dad was in radio, and I sometimes think about my own podcast or just in general. And if my dad came back and I explained to him, Dad, I have a radio show, but it's not really a radio show. Actually, it's on video too. And I can talk to people around the world. And then it would his brain would explode. But so easy to impress. And then the other thing is the hard to offend. I mean, again, and there are things that happen in life that are genuinely offensive, and there's things that go down that we shouldn't just like blow off or like, however, I would say the majority of the time, most of us get offended or upset or take things personally. It's usually not personal to us. And in the case, again, of an upset customer, you want to absolutely take it seriously. You want to listen. But the guy who thinks you're going to steal his jet skis, like, that's kind of crazy, right? But at the same time, it's like, if you can somehow not get super offended by that and not get super defensive about that and not, right? And just okay, and do what needs to be done. And just like, wow, okay, Jeff's really stressed about his jet skis. That's okay. Like, and maybe it's a point where you realize, we don't want that customer anymore. And this is a bummer that it played out that way. But sometimes we find that out the hard way. Yeah, right? Or sometimes you also find out that one of your cleaners did do something weird and they weren't owning up to it. And it was an unfortunate, really messy situation to realize, wow, that person's not actually the right fit for the team. That sucks. But like, good thing we found out. And you know what I mean? So again, I think if we can think of it that way, and most criticisms, most complaints are opportunities for growth if we choose to look at them that way. Absolutely.
And thinking on that whole, easy to impress and hard to offend, obviously it all comes from the top and us behaving in that way. Do you have any like very specific way? Like I'm like, how can I create this mindset in my staff? Because I feel like I'm very easy to impress. And I love just one phrase that I hate is, people shouldn't get accolades for just showing up and doing their job. Because I feel that especially a lot of my staff come from the healthcare industry. That seems to be like a big pipeline for us of they've been very underappreciated. They've been run ragged. They're used to grow stuff. So it's a great avenue for us for right. Great workers. And they just never felt like what they did was enough or, because their job is hard. And so I guess, do you feel the same that it's like how much the whole pat on the back and just that appreciation, like how frequent is too frequent? Is there an upper level?
It's really hard to over-appreciate people if we do it genuinely. I mean, I think we can inauthentically over-recognize people, but in terms of appreciation, I mean, my comment on this often is, I've been studying appreciation for the whole 25 years I've been doing this. I've never heard anyone say to me in any context, you know what, Mike, I'm just too appreciated. It's too much. No, I wish my boss and my coworkers and my friends and my spouse and my kids would just stop appreciating me. It's getting on my nerves. No. So I think if we do it genuinely, we can't really overdo it. I do think we don't necessarily there does sometimes if you show up long enough at any job, you will get some recognition like, hey, you've been here a year, you've been here 5 years. So we do get some recognition just for showing up. But I think there's a way in which what you're speaking to, Stephanie, is like, can we value people and thank them for coming and thank them for being there? Absolutely. And I don't think we're overdoing it if it comes from a genuine place. And so, and in terms of influencing your staff or wanting people to operate in a certain way, there's really only two ways to influence people that I'm aware of. One is that we can model the behavior that we want, right? It's what Gandhi taught us all, be the change, right? So it's like you want people to be more kind or more responsible or more communicative or more, patient, whatever, fill in the blank. Start by being that yourself, especially as a leader or an owner. The second thing that you can do, and we've been talking about it throughout our conversation, is give people feedback, but not feedback like you should be this way. Because as I was talking earlier about self-righteousness, the natural human response to self-righteousness is defensiveness. So
I wrote that down. That was one I wrote down. I was like, that's great.
Yeah. And again, sometimes we do it with really good intention. We want someone to be better. We want someone to be whatever, but we're doing it in this kind of, even if we're saying it really nicely, we're basically saying, you're doing it wrong. I'm doing it right. Be more like me. And that usually elicits that defensiveness from the other person. So giving someone feedback is offering them potentially some advice or a different way to do something, but it's doing it from the place of a place of humility that basically says, look, try this on, or consider this, or here's another way to think about it. I'm not saying it's right with a capital R or that I know the truth with a capital T. I'm just saying, here's my perspective and I want to offer this to you. Or another way to think about feedback is if someone's doing something negative that we don't want, instead of calling them out or admonishing them, letting them know what's the impact of the negative behavior on us. Because that gives them a sense of, oh, wow. Again, I mean, the classic situation where someone's late, We could not say anything and be mad. We could lecture them and tell them how wrong it is and bad and blah, blah, blah. Or we can let them know, here's the impact when that happens. It creates stress for me. It creates stress for the team. We're scrambling around. Do we have to find a replacement? Right? Oh, and if they can get the impact of it, it's not going to magically change their behavior, but they're going to have more awareness of like, I don't want to have that negative impact on these other people that I work with or care about. So I'll think twice about how I organize my life so that I can hopefully show up on time more often than not, you know?
Yeah. So just kind of focusing on like, well, one being very, I guess, yeah, candid with how they're affecting us. But yeah, I love that. I think that would be very helpful, especially considering like, yeah, like I said, feedback, especially, it's very often, quality related for our industry. Like, hey, you missed this. And one of the like practical ways that we help, I guess, establish that kind of safety to get feedback is everybody is to check everybody. So if somebody is at a job site with somebody else, you both check each other's work, whether that's a newbie, they just started, or you've been here for 5 years, or you're cleaning with me. We're going to check each other's work.
Yeah. And that's a good way to establish it. Another thing to think about feedback, just like an example, like interpersonally, let's just say we're talking or we've known each other, we're friends, we work together, and you notice, which is true for me, that I sometimes interrupt you or other people, right? You could then lecture you could lecture me about it and go, that's rude and you shouldn't interrupt people. And you would be correct in my judgment. However, if you said to me, Mike, when you interrupt me or when you just interrupted me or when we were in that meeting yesterday and you interrupt, I got flustered and then I lost my train of thought and I forgot what I was going to say. And I wanted to say something really important that we were talking about and it just went away. Now, again, in that moment, what it's going to do is stop me and go, first I'm going to go, oh God, right? I'm probably going to say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do whatever, but it's giving me a sense of my impact on you in that sense, as opposed to you lecturing me in some morally superior way that I should communicate differently than I do and more like you and more like whatever you know what I mean? We all do this in life. We do this in our personal relationships all the time. We're constantly judging each other and trying to impose our morals and our values and our priorities onto our partners or our friends or which again, doesn't make us evil, but it doesn't usually motivate, oh, you know what? My friend just told me how wrong I was. I'm going to change. Or my spouse just told, no, it's usually when we can vulnerably let someone know, here's the impact of that. Similarly, on the flip side, positively, the best way we can really let someone know something that we appreciate and value about them is let them know what they've done and the positive impact it's had on us. Because then it's like, you just gave someone this great gift where then they realize, oh, wow, I did this thing and it had real value to that person and it had a positive impact. They also can't argue because most of us aren't very good at taking compliments or appreciation. If someone says, oh, you look nice or you're smart or you're funny, you're like, oh no, I'm actually an idiot. But if you say, when you said that thing, it really sparked a bunch of good ideas for me. Or when you reminded me of that, it really motivated me to do something different. I'm so grateful for your, whatever. Mm-hmm. It cuts through the other person's little sort of gremlin in their mind and actually has them get the impact that they're having.
I love that. So I'm just to kind of wrap up, if we do have any very, let's say, analytical minded folks listening and they're all like, this has been an hour of touchy-feeliness. Why should why would I do this? So can we talk about ROI a little bit of all of this behavior and what does that do from like a bottom line retention standpoint?
Well, look, there was a study done recently by Glassdoor, which looks at people who leave working places. And it was like, I think it was 81% of people said they would have stayed longer with their company or with their team if they felt more valued and appreciated. And only 37% of people in that same survey said, I'm motivated to work harder when my boss is hard on me. So call it what you want, touchy-feely and all of it. And for years, Stephanie, people have been saying, this is all nice, but it's soft skills. And I always say, yeah, soft skills are hard. dealing with humans is hard. And so again, if you want to be the best performing team that you can, you really want to develop these skills, not only in yourself, but your team. And we didn't really even talk about my background. I come from the world of sports. I played baseball all growing up and in college and then professionally. And it was like, I took all of this stuff away, and we weren't talking about any of that stuff back in the 80s and 90s when I was doing this. But so much of the best coaches and the best teams I was on, we all really cared about each other, valued each other, had each other's backs. And it wasn't just a warm, fuzzy, touchy-feely, make us feel good thing. It like translated to how we performed on the field. And I always performed better when I was on a team that had good chemistry, where we actually cared about each other, versus one that I wasn't. And I didn't totally understand it in those days. And now 25 years later of doing this work and researching and writing about this, like, this stuff really matters. You got to do it in your own authentic way. It's got to be real for you, but doing it in that way has a huge impact on you and everybody around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you called it kind of, I remember you saw it in especially sports, a rock star team versus a team of rock stars, or however you phrased it. And that, like, it's a total different thing just when it comes to how the performance actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that being a team of champions is great, but being a championship team is what we all want. And that's where everybody makes each other better.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Mike, this has been amazing. I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you. It's been really enlightening, and I hope for our listeners, educational and something that they can take away and start applying today in their business and kind of right the ship if culture has been a little off for them. So obviously, I've mentioned several of your books. Where can our listeners find out more of you?
You can find me on all the socials, but best place to find out about me and my work is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com.
Perfect. Well, we will definitely link all of that in our bio below. And again, thanks, Mike. And thank you to our listeners. Of course, guys, hit that like, hit that subscribe, write a nice comment from Mike, give him some appreciation perhaps. And we'll see you on the next episode of Filthy Rich Cleaners. Bye, guys.